there, photo world. Erica Robinson here again. I am a national tech rep with Tamron USA, and the first time you saw me, I was talking about my 5 favorite images of 2019. Well, in case you didn't notice, all of those images were travel related because my life basically revolves around travel. So this time we're going to talk about 5 tips to improve your travel photography. And as I say in all of my seminars, I really do hope that if you get just one thing out of these presentations, it's that you are inspired, that you're inspired to photograph more, to think outside of the box, to get outside of your comfort zone, and to learn. So if anything, I do hope that you are inspired to do just that. So my first tip, we'll get right into it here. My first tip is to do your research. We have technology at our fingertips. We have all of our phones, we have all of our computers. We have the ability to learn anything new that we want to. So I strongly suggest to do your research. Understand if you're going out for a sunrise or a sunset that there needs to be a specific time that you're there. Understand that if you're going to photograph this one very specific bird, that you know its migration, and that if you know its migration is in April, but you show up in June, you're going to be sorely disappointed when you get there and it's not there. So understand those different changes, understand seasonal changes and star movements and weather patterns, things like that. That way you can get out there at the right moment to create the images that you're trying to create. One of those examples in particular, I encounter a lot when I am out doing our Night Sky National Park trips. We need to know our seasons and the direction in which we're going to see the Milky Way. Because we rotate, the Milky Way is going to come in at a kind of a directional, at a left angle coming in earlier on in the summer versus later on in the year. It's going to come in more at a kind of straight up and down direction. So I need to know those patterns because it is going to make a difference in the composition of my image. If I tried to go and photograph this scene where the direction of the Milky Way was coming in from the left-hand side, it just wouldn't have created as interesting of a scene. So I knew that creating this scene later on in the year would probably be better with the direction of the Milky Way. Knowing those things can really only improve your photography. And these are a couple of apps that I use, so I thought they might be helpful to put in here. These are just a few that I use on my travels when it comes to doing my research and just photography in general. Sky Guide and PhotoPills are really going to help with your sunset, sunrise time, night sky patterns, all of those things. They are deep wells of information, that's for sure. Snapseed is a really quick little editing tool that I've used before. And then, of course, Currency Converter and Google Translate for all of my international travels or when I'm trying to communicate with someone where we don't speak the same language. These are really, really helpful tools to use. So do your research and find out which ones are going to be more helpful for you and your situation. Next up is to have your settings ready. We can make it only easier on ourselves when we approach a scene that we need to have our settings ready for. In this particular situation, or in a lot of street scenes, things are moving very quickly and you kind of have to walk by at a quicker pace. You don't have time to really spend there because if you do, your scene will change. So sometimes it is better to be almost the fly on the wall, so to speak. So I approached this scene with my general settings ready for that exposure so that I knew when I got there, I wouldn't have to stand around too long, put my camera up to my face, take it down, change settings, put my camera up, take it down. It just was a lot more effective for this particular scene. And having your settings ready doesn't just necessarily mean for street scenes, but for the outdoors as well. There are lots of situations where we are trying to keep the pace and we're trying to move along in our scene, not spend a ton of time there. In this case, hiking with a friend, I didn't want to hold her back, so I knew I wanted to see the motion in the water there. So I went up knowing I needed to be at a slower shutter speed, and then I adjusted my other settings accordingly. So I just want you guys to try and be prepared for those kind of situations. My next tip is to be welcoming to change. Your scene is maybe not necessarily always going to be as predicted. In this particular case, I was out in Iceland, and if you notice, I actually put the same image in my top 5 favorite images of 2019 seminar because this is still one of my favorites. But this scene we certainly didn't predict. We didn't know that there was going to be a big storm coming up over the next couple of days. And by the time we got to this black sand beach in Iceland, the weather was really, really rough. The winds were hitting up to about 90 miles an hour. But we still wanted to get out, and we still wanted to kind of see what was going on. And of course, I wanted to photograph. So getting out to the Black Sand Beach that day, there was still a few people in the parking lot, surprisingly enough. And when everyone walked towards the beach, you of course had to walk forward towards the water. But because the wind was so rough, you actually had to walk backwards towards the car. You couldn't face in that direction because the sand would just come ripping towards you. But because it was such a insane weather day, it led to some really beautiful dramatic images, and this one being one of my favorites. So when you kind of when you get to scenes where they weren't necessarily the way you wanted them, weren't necessarily the way you predicted them, still photograph, still try. It may lead you to something that you didn't know, that you didn't expect. My tip number 4 is to talk to people. Don't be a stranger. And I know that that sounds really, really scary, but the more you practice, the easier it will come to you. The more experience you'll have with it. So talk to people and be approachable, be relatable. It could create some really incredible stories. So in this particular case, this is out in Little Havana in Miami, and this gentleman owns one of the cigar shops that's on the main strip there. And because there are so many people coming in and out all the time, there's so much going on, so many tour buses and things like that. He sees a lot of people. He interacts with a lot of people with cameras. So when I went into his shop, I actually put my camera away. It almost makes it like it's less threatening. You become a person that just wants to talk, that just wants to see the shop and isn't looking for anything. So I put my camera back into my bag and I walked around the shop and talked a little bit with him. Then I didn't take any photos. I just told him I'd be back. So I left. I left for about an hour. I came back about an hour later, started talking to him again, and bought some cigars from his shop. Actually as really great gifts. So then after we started chatting a bit, I noticed the tattoos on his arms and asked him if I could take some photos. And he was more than willing. He was happy to take photos with me because I had broken down that barrier with him, because I had had a conversation, made myself approachable. And it wasn't just that I was taking something. After all, these are their stories that we are sharing. So it's really nice when they have a good interaction with you. It just leaves a good taste in their mouth for when they encounter somebody else who wants to photograph them. So give that a try. That even stands when that tip still even stands when you have language barriers. There have been lots of situations that I've been in where I don't speak the language of someone that I'm photographing. But believe it or not, a smile goes a really long way. And the great thing about digital is that when you take an image, you can then turn your camera around so that the person you're photographing can see the images that you took. So it's nice to spend a little bit of time with them, photograph them, show them the images. This was actually probably the 5th or 6th image that I took of him after I had shown him the originals, mostly because then he saw exactly what he was getting himself into, and he could pose and he could take he could sit the way he wanted to and feel more comfortable with me. So talking to people can lead to some really, really great stories. And my last tip for you is to spend time in your scene. Even if it's not people, spend time in any scene that you're photographing. In this particular case, I spent about 45 minutes here, and the light drastically changed during this time. So when I say spend some time because the light is going to change, because the action is going to change, because the colors are going to change. Depending on how long you spend there, you're going to see a lot more happen. So in this particular scene, I had originally just started taking a couple of pictures because I was curious as to why this gentleman rode his bike onto the sand of the beach. It just seemed really difficult. So I started making a couple of photos, and then he scared away some of the birds, and it made for an even better scene because it filled up some of that negative space that was in the top left corner there. And then as the sun started to go down, it created some really beautiful colors. And in that time that I had waited, there was a girl about my age who had come up near me, and she had her surfboard with her. She had just come out of the water. And we get to talking, and jokingly, I have her surfboard on my head, and I see this really beautiful reflection of the water in the surfboard. So I turn around quickly towards the scene. I keep the surfboard on my head, and I photograph with my super wide 15 to 30 so that I could get that entire scene in my frame. And that's only because I waited a little bit longer than I had originally planned. I actually continued waiting after that because then the sun got even better, the light, the colors got even better, and because her and I had chatted a bit, I had asked if she would mind standing for a picture and create this beautiful silhouette. So a big tip is to wait through your scene and not just rush it away. So with those 5 tips, thank you so much for hanging out with me. You can find me on social media, both on Facebook and Instagram as Tamron Tech Erica. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, or if you just want to follow along on the journey, please feel free. Thank you again for being here, and I hope you are all safe and well at home. Bye now.